Legends, written by Anthony Izzo, read by Scott MacDonald. Though small in stature, within you beat a lion's heart. Be at peace, my boy. All of our love to you. 1. It was time for Keppler to cut the woman's clothes off. She was in his cellar, decomposing. This was the worst part of the process. The stink would be awful. He sat at the kitchen table in the farmhouse, drinking black coffee. He was halfway through his second cup and considered getting a third. You're putting things off. He finished the coffee and set the cup in the sink. Then he squirted some dish soap in it and washed it. Once it was clean, he dried it with a plaid-patterned dish rag and set the cup on the drain board. You're stalling. After drying his hands, Keppler proceeded to the cellar, where he flipped a switch. The cellar was underneath the entire 3,500 square foot home. His father had built a maze of hallways and rooms down here when Keppler was 10. He'd been required to help. If he didn't bring his father a tool fast enough or cut a board wrong, he got cuffed in the head. A few times he had to duck a hammer flung at him in anger. His father had had a short fuse. Melvin Keppler had been smart enough to lay the real beatings on body parts Keppler's teachers wouldn't see. His arms had been forever bruised. As a kid, he'd always worn long sleeves. That sucked during the summers. His father had done the same to Keppler's mother. She would get into a bottle of cheap whiskey, belching booze fumes. His father would get angry and punch her arms and legs as she slumped in the corner of the kitchen, the whole time calling him names. "You're a worthless cocksucker, lazy, limp dick, weakling. You're no man. Go ahead and kill me if you think you can." The blows would rain down on his mother. Keppler would shut his bedroom door. He was 11 years old at the time. It sounded like someone pounding a side of beef. The screaming and swearing devolved into soft whimpers. Keppler had no love for either of his parents, but he dreamed of jamming a screwdriver through his father's eye socket and watching him twitch as if shocked. One night, in his 12th year, Keppler's father had broken his mother's nose. It was 2 days before Christmas. The cops came and hauled his father to jail. He saw his father only 2 more times after that, both during prison visits. Years later, another inmate bashed his father's skull in with a wooden table leg. Keppler felt nothing for his father's loss. He would have danced on the man's grave if given the chance. After his father's death, his mother lived in a whiskey bottle. Keppler found her dead on the bathroom floor a few weeks after he turned 22. He'd come home after working a shift as a machinist to find her blue-faced and stinking up the bathroom. She'd passed out and choked on her own vomit. The house was his after that. To his surprise, his parents had a will, and he inherited everything, including the 400 acres they owned. The extra land had come in handy with his pursuits. He navigated the basement, ending up in a room that functioned as a storm cellar. Normally he kept it padlocked from the outside. Because his quarry had expired 2 days ago, he'd unlocked it. No chance of escape with the woman dead. In the storm cellar, he had 4 50-gallon drums lined up. Using a hand truck, he wheeled it through the cellar to his special room. He took keys from his pocket and unlocked the padlock, which secured a thick chain to the door. Inside, he flipped on the lights. The woman, whose name was Jill Cordova, according to her ID, lay on a sturdy table he'd built. He'd built it years ago. He unfastened the woman from the table. After taking a knife from a nearby table, he cut off her clothes. She stared up at him. He'd cut a smile in her throat. Looked like hungry mouth to him. After removing her clothes, he picked her up and stuffed her in the barrel. Some things snapped inside her. No matter. She easily fit in the barrel. One reason he liked petite women. The rest of her clothes were in a backpack upstairs. He'd grabbed her at a rest stop. He'd gathered she'd been hitchhiking, a dangerous proposition with people like Keppler around. He threw the clothes inside the barrel. It was important that he sent them to the grave naked, leaving as they'd come into the world. He put the lid on the drum and wheeled it to the storm cellar. Keppler had installed a small ramp leading to the outer doors. He pushed them open and muscled the barrel up the ramp. His size was an advantage when moving barrels and bodies. People had always stared at him. 6'9" and 300 pounds. He knew he was a freak. His mother, in one of her drunken binges, had told him as much. "You nearly tore my insides out, Richard. Ripped me wide open when you were born." As if she'd had to push out a 6'9" baby. Outside the storm cellar, he muscled the drum into the bed of his pickup. Then he hopped in the cab. A rutted road led through the woods behind his property. No one came up here, which was good for him. He drove for a bit before reaching the grave he'd dug. Still had a shovel standing up in the dirt. He parked and hoisted the barrel from the bed. Then he shoved it into the grave he'd dug. Sweat trickled down his back as he filled in the hole. It was mid-October and cool. The damned sweat made him feel as if he'd run a mile. Once the grave was filled in, he headed back to the house. In an upstairs bedroom, he removed the woman's spare clothes from her pack. He was careful to empty out pockets and check tags for no signs of identification. Satisfied the clothes looked generic enough, he headed to the cellar and threw them in the washer. While the clothes washed, he would take a shower and get the stink of death off himself. The woman's clothes had finished washing. He smelled fresh, like Irish Spring soap. Keppler had another cup of coffee. Also made himself an omelet and some sausages. After plating his breakfast, he headed down and put the clothes in the dryer. Upstairs, he devoured the food and washed his plates. There would be no dirty dishes in this house. When he was a kid, crusty dishes had been piled in the sink. Mice had skittered along the floors, leaving droppings. Roaches climbed over the dirty dishes. Once he'd inherited the house, dishes gone, done right away. When he took possession of the house, he'd hired a cleaning woman to scour the place. She'd filled dozens of trash bags and spent hours cleaning up mouse droppings and dead roaches. His parents never threw out papers. Piles of envelopes, letters, and old receipts littered the house. Those went in a shredder. Once the house had been cleaned, he'd hired an exterminator. A clean home also didn't arouse suspicion. Had someone viewed dishes piled in the sink and trash strewn everywhere, they would have found out. Ever been up to the Keppler place? It's a goddamn mess. You should see it. Once the dishes were washed, he grabbed the dried laundry and stuffed it in a garbage bag. He headed out to his truck and drove into town, pulling into the First Christian Church. The church's lawn was getting shaggy, and leaves had blown into the front gardens. He'd have to stop by and take care of that. He couldn't slack on his duties as church caretaker. Next to the church was a one-story brick building that functioned as a donation center. He parked in front of the building and grabbed the trash bag filled with clothes. Inside, he spotted Mary Esteban, who ran the donation center. She was sorting through some canned goods. "Mary," Keppler said, nodding. "What brings you in, Richard?" "I have some old clothes for donation." "Wonderful. Set them over there, please," Mary said, pointing to a pile of filled trash bags. They never questioned him when he brought clothes in. He was just a good church-going citizen doing his part to help the disadvantaged. People could be so fucking stupid sometimes. Keppler set the bag in the pile. "Richard, could you do a favor for me?" Mary said. "I can. There's a light bulb out in the storage room. Mind changing it?" He did, but he didn't complain. "I'll take care of it." He went to the storage room and grabbed a light bulb from the shelf. Didn't need a ladder. He reached up and unscrewed the dead bulb. Then he placed a new one. He didn't give two shits for the church or anyone here. He needed money. Also needed people to see him as a solid citizen. Gacy had his clown gig. Just a friendly clown entertaining the community. The bike path rapist who'd terrorized the Buffalo area had coached Little League. Bundy presented himself as an average guy in need of help when he approached victims. The mild-mannered church caretaker was Keppler's thing. The light bulb changed. He threw the old one in a trash can near the storage room. On his way out, he nodded to Mary, who was busy sorting clothes. She waved and told him to have a good day.